All right, so welcome everyone to the April 2026 Lunch and Learn. I am your host, Don Wilson, and I'm joined today by Paul Berube, who is taking time away from his vacation to act as my co-host for this month's presentation. So thank you very, very much for that, Paul.
More
So
than
today,
welcome.
our guest client presenter is Tom Wertman, the safety manager at Acme Corrugated Box Company, located in Hatboro, PA, which is a suburb just north of Philly, for those of you who have an interest in geography. So I first met Tom in person at that facility in June of 2023 during the beta version rollout of the Safe Start Refresher Unit. And as I recall, that was being delivered in the middle of the night by Joe Cantarelli to a very competitive and enthusiastic team audience from Acme. So well done on that, Joe. So some of you on the call today from Safe Start may also have met Tom when he joined us as a program presenter at last year's Safe Start Forum. If you did, you would remember that Tom is an accomplished and detail-oriented senior environmental health and safety professional with over 25 years of progressive experience at both regional and site levels. Throughout his career, Tom has established a proven track record of achieving injury prevention and maintaining regulatory compliance through the implementation of comprehensive risk assessments, rigorous auditing processes, and impactful employee engagement activities. We love to hear about engagement at Safe Start. Tom is highly focused on leading indicators and advancing safety culture. To accomplish this, Tom leverages proven strategies to drive continuous improvement in EHS performance, fostering safer work environments and reducing organizational risk. As you can see, his presentation today is titled From Compliance to Core Value, the Safe Start Strategy. So during this lunch and learn session, Tom will share his organization's journey in safety and his integration of the Safe Start and Safe Lead processes into Acme's overall safety management system. As usual, Tom has agreed to take questions from our group after his presentation, so please send me yours using the Zoom chat function. And as usual, please mute your mic and turn off your camera during the presentation so that we can preserve the bandwidth. But before we hand things over to Tom, I'm going to ask my co-host today, Paul, to talk a little bit about his own experience with Acme and to give a shout out to some of the members of our consulting and implementation services team who have been instrumental in helping Acme achieve success with our processes. So, Paul, over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Don. Yeah, it's nice. We've been working with Tom and his team like for the last couple of years. Been a great pleasure. A lot of good things happening over there. Big shout out to Jay Bauman, the VP on the account, Larry Perlin, who was on site delivering safely and helped them with that, and Derek Ostrom, who's currently doing Safe Start Now relaunch at the site and doing some fantastic work with Acme. So been a pleasure working with them and look forward to more great things to happen.
All right. Thank you, Paul, for that. I'm sure there's other people that we've missed in here somehow. But Tom, if you're ready, I'm going to hand it back to you. So take it away and tell us about the Acme experience.
Absolutely, and good afternoon, everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. I just do want to make a mention before I start that we did have a couple of technical glitches, so I can't see anybody. So if you do have your camera on and make faces at me, I will be undeterred because I won't be able to see you. So I just wanted to put that out there. But I do want to talk quite seriously about the value that Safe Start has brought us at Acme. And I really want to start out with the hard truth. Compliance alone doesn't prevent injuries. You know, we can have OSHA required programs in place, but we still have incidents. And the reason for that is most injuries are not caused by a lack of knowledge. They're caused by human factors, right? So this slide lays out our kind of core concepts. We all know about rushing, frustration, fatigue, and complacency. And they lead to the predictable errors of eyes and mind, off task, and line of exposure, and that's what ultimately causes injuries. So if we only face the injury or even the hazard, we're reacting. But if we focus on human state, we can intervene earlier, and that's where CORE comes in. So safety is not a priority. I think most people here understand the difference between the two because we have it as a core value. And so in order for me to get creative with Safe Start in between units, I decided to take that term CORE and determine and create a group of employees, and I'll explain how that works. But CORE stands for commitment, ownership, responsibility, and excellence. And no, I did not come up with that myself. I had little friends with ChatGPT that thought that'd be a good way to call it. So I said, sure, no problem. So one of the things that we do at Acme is every meeting starts with safety, no matter what the topic matter is. So it's not just safety meetings where we talk that. And so the way we try to drive the concepts with Safe Start is to not only apply it to the work environment, which is the most obvious, but taking it at home and sharing it with your family and looking at those states to errors outside of work, because when we do that, we condition them better to look for those inside of work. So one of the things that I have done is I'm kind of a techno nerd, even though we had some Zoom issues, but I now have the company volunteers, and we'll talk about this too a little bit later, about telling Safe Start stories at the beginning of every meeting. And I put mine to video. And so since this is just another meeting, we want to make sure that we started out using the Acme way. And this is my Safe Start story. Hi, I'm Tom, and this is my Safe Start story. It was Halloween night on 2019. A bunch of my neighbors and I had planned to meet up and take a big group of kids trick-or-treating for Halloween. We had been doing it together for a few years in a row. That year, we weren't even sure it was going to happen because it had rained heavily all day. But by dinner time, the rain finally stopped, so we all got together around dusk and headed out. There was a pretty large group of adults and a lot of young kids to keep an eye on. Everyone was excited, and I was focused on the kids, the traffic, and just keeping the group moving. What I didn't account for was the condition of the ground. There were a lot of leaves that were wet on the sidewalks, and they were absolutely soaked from the rain earlier in the day. So as it got darker, we came to a corner where the concrete sidewalk had a small decline where it met the street. As soon as I stepped onto that spot, bam, I went down hard. And the result was serious. My left tibia cracked almost from top to bottom. I ended up needing emergency surgery the next day, and in the end, I limped away with a titanium rod and 10 screws in my leg. Looking back, my state was complacency. I wasn't paying close attention to my surroundings, and I assumed the sidewalk was safe because I'd walked it 100 times before. My critical errors were eyes not on task, mind not on task, and balance, traction, and grip. The safety-related habit that would have helped me most was simply testing my footing before I committed my weight, especially in low light and wet conditions. It definitely could have been worse. I was fortunate I didn't hit my head or suffer another injury. But it's a powerful reminder that even familiar situations can change quickly, and it only takes one step to end up with a life-changing injury. So one of the beauties of this type of concept, especially for our leadership team, is to show support through humility and to let people know that you have psychological safety and it's okay to tell these stories. There's going to be no reprimands for that, because safety does not care about job title or human echelon issues, right? So if it can happen to the safety manager, it can certainly happen to anyone. So a little bit about Acme.
Walk into Acme Corrugated Box today, and you'll find an operation capable of producing packaging for almost anything. They can fold and glue a tiny jewelry box or stamp out heavy-duty refrigerator crates. To hit that kind of scale, the floor relies on a 110-inch phosphor corrugator and multiple flexo folder gluers running simultaneously. The sheer volume of material moving through these lines is staggering. But back in early 1900s Philadelphia, the operation was unrecognizable. Edward J. Cohn launched the business in 1918 as a scrap paper operation. spending his days handling raw materials instead of manufacturing finished boxes. Large-scale manufacturing often builds its foundation on these local, opportunistic trades before ever reaching the point of high-speed automation. That opportunism was tested at the end of World War II. The once abundant post-war scrap paper market dwindled rapidly. When the primary resource of a business dries up, leadership faces a binary choice: find a new model immediately or close the doors. Acme chose to abandon the scrap collection that built them. They shifted their focus entirely to selling finished boxes. That decision set the company's trajectory for the next 70 years, allowing Edward's two sons, Arnold and Bob, to expand the business through the 1960s and 70s. Acme survived because its leadership was willing to let their original model die when the environment changed. By the 1970s, simply selling boxes was no longer enough to stay competitive. Survival meant manufacturing the product in-house. Building raw packaging requires heavy equipment and deep inventory. That demands a drastically larger physical footprint, kicking off a multi-decade battle for floor space. In 1970, they moved to a larger facility on American Street in Philadelphia. This allowed them to officially begin manufacturing their own corrugated boxes. They outgrew it within a decade. By 1980, they had to relocate the entire operation to a sprawling plant in Bensalem. Eventually, even the Bensalem floor hit its limit. In 2001, Acme moved a final time to the Hatboro facility to support a new tier of production growth. In heavy industry, physical space is the ceiling. If you run out of square footage, you cap your potential revenue and freeze your market share. But warehouse space is only half the equation. Even with an endless factory floor, a company's total output is limited by the speed of its machinery. Through the 1980s and 90s, Bob Cohen took over as president and began aggressively tearing out obsolete equipment to keep pace with the market. The early factory floors were defined by heavy analog equipment like these green letterpress machines, which were durable but slow. To push more volume, they brought in automated forming equipment like the EMBA 240, increasing the number of units they could produce per hour. For specialized high-volume runs, they installed precision systems like the Langston Saturn Flexo folder gluer. When a mid-sized machine hits its absolute physical limit, increasing volume usually requires a massive capital investment for a larger replacement, but that often demands floor space that simply isn't available yet. The twin box slitter solves this by changing the material shape. It runs an extra wide sheet of cardboard, and as it moves through the line, the slitter divides it down the middle, doubling production without upgrading the core machine. True scale isn't always about buying a bigger building. Sometimes it's about cleverly manipulating the mathematics of your existing production line. That drive to optimize brings us to the present. In 2021, Acme initiated a massive expansion of the Hatboro facility to fully realize its high-tech form. They installed a new 110-inch Fosber corrugator, a 60-foot high-rack system, and integrated iFast software to manage logistics. But automated high-speed machines introduce a critical vulnerability: the safety of the humans operating them. Protecting workers has been a priority at Acme for decades, long before modern regulations required it. Even in the mid-century, they were actively celebrating a full year with 0 lost time injuries. Today, that culture takes the form of their Passion for Safety and Safe Start programs. They track safe days on the floor and encourage employees to share personal safety stories to keep vigilance high. A company cannot safely multiply the speed and weight of its machinery without proportionally strengthening the cultural systems designed to protect its people. Which brings us back to the central question: how does an operation survive for over 100 years? It isn't by finding a single business model in 1918 and stubbornly refusing to deviate from it. Acme traded scrap paper, then they sold boxes. They hit the warehouse walls, then they built a campus. Analog presses maxed out, then they engineered slitters. Longevity is a relentless cycle. You identify the constraint holding you back, and you adapt to break past it. Look at the rows of red delivery trucks lined up outside Hatboro today. They are the result of a century spent repeating that process. In this business, you don't survive by avoiding problems. You survive by consistently outgrowing them.
So, being an employee here for the last 5 years has certainly taught me a lot about the value of how different businesses are run. And we all have experience and we all have stories about that. But working for the Cohen family, it's a privilege to work here. And I would say that offline as I would on. The Cohen family is all about excellence. They're all about safety, and they're all about precision and growth. And our business is still growing today. So, let's throw this into the Safe Start model. Well, the one thing we know is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for safety, and treating it that way is where many programs fail. So every facility operates with a different hazard profile based on its equipment, processes, human interactions, right? In our environment, we're dealing with high energy, high throughput systems, corrugators with multiple nip points, rotating components, automated stackers. The list goes on and on. But that's where Safe Start and Safe Lead become valuable to us. They're not rigid programs. What they are is adaptable framework. They allow us to focus attention and resources where the risk is usually the highest. So instead of spreading efforts thin across low impact issues, we can align training, observations, leadership engagement around the exposures that have the greatest potential for serious injury. So from an OSHA perspective, this approach directly aligns with the hierarchy of controls and hazard-specific mitigation strategies. But OSHA doesn't expect to blanket solutions. They expect employers to perform hazard assessments, identify task-specific risks, implement controls, and all that stuff. So the real value here goes beyond compliance. So when you choose focus on your high-risk exposure, you're going to reduce the likelihood of a severe and life-altering injury. And this is where Safe Start and Safe Lead comes in to help us, because it's not a silver bullet. It's an adaptable program. And you basically get the output from the program by what you put into it for your investment, right? So, there might be some people that just do 4 trainings per year and call it good, but we need to keep the pulse on Safe Start and Safe Lead throughout the year. And I'm here today to share some of the ways that we do that. So thinking about how this gets aligned. So a person, one of the most important slides in the entire presentation is every incident follows a chain, right? We know the person is in a state. They're rushing, fatigued, frustrated. That leads to the error, like losing focus or putting themselves in the line of fire. That error results in the injury, but traditional investigations often stop at the error or the hazard. But if we don't address the state, the same thing has a higher chance to repeat. So, OSHA expects root cause analysis, but we have to go beyond the surface and address the contributing human factors. Because anytime that you mix human performance with machinery, there is always going to be an opportunity for those errors. So before I go to my next slide, I know Larry's on. I think he's seen this before, but I have to do my due diligence and really let's try and find out who the real Larry Wilson is. And when Derek was here doing Unit 3 a few months ago, I did kind of steal this from Derek, but he could be one of 3 people, or he could be one person with 3 different personalities. I'm not quite sure. So I just want to ask the question, is this the real Larry Wilson, the one who is so heavily involved in Safe Start and the authoring of the program? Or has he been moonlighting as Indiana Jones? Or is he Scott Bakula, that Quantum Leap guy? We put these pictures out to my employees here at Acme, and nobody could figure out which one was the real Larry. So I'm hoping that maybe when Derek comes back to do Unit 4 with us, coincidentally on Monday, we're going to get to the bottom of this mystery, and we're going to solve it. So just wanted to throw that out there, Larry. So, but let's talk about the human stuff, right? So resources and outcomes they're not always mutually exclusive, right? So you can invest in all kinds of money in your process, but if you don't have the reality of the people working together, you're not going to achieve your goals. And one of the analogies I'd like to show you folks is Major League Baseball. The New York Mets have typically been a high-spending ball team. But in 2023, they had the biggest payroll in all of baseball. And their payroll was $300 million. Incredible amount of money. But you know what? That year they went 75-87 and absolutely missed the playoffs. So your financial investment is only as good as you work with it. So if we compare that to what happens here at Acme, we need to make sure we don't have a roster and that we have a team. And you'll know that when you hit your production on all cylinders. And doing that, that's considering human factors and employee awareness. And again, this is where I tout the value of Safe Start and Safe Lead. So basically, we have 3 layers of human behavior. So when we say behavior is situational, we recognize that people don't operate in a vacuum. The same employee who follows every procedure on one shift can take a shortcut on another, not because their values change, but because the conditions around them change. So instead of saying, why did they do that? That usually ends up with a blame excuse, like they weren't paying attention, they didn't follow the procedure. Instead, we also ask questions. What conditions made that behavior more likely? Because when somebody does something dangerous and has a close call or has behavior that drives them towards an injury, there's something going on inside their mind at that very moment that said that is an okay thing to do. So we have 3 layers of human behavior. And so I've got a cross section of a corrugated box here. So if you follow me from the bottom to the top, the inner liner is the person's DNA. It is just how we're wired, and we can't change those things. But the fluting, the middle section, is life experience, right? So the past is in the past. You got influenced by the experiences you had. That is another thing we cannot change. However, when we look at the outer liner, that's the environment. Where we are dictates how we are expected to act. We have direct influence to be able to change that. And I'll give you a rough example of how this works. Ask yourself this question. Would you behave the same way in a biker bar on Saturday night as you would in church on Sunday morning? The answer, I'm hoping, is obviously no, right? But the environment dictates behavior. So the same principle applies directly to the workplace. In a controlled, well-organized environment, clear procedures, good housekeeping, strong supervision, all of this stuff, it makes the environment conducive to reinforcing safe behavior. But change the conditions. If you increase time pressure, introduce equipment issues or downtime stress or staffing shortages or inconsistent enforcement of rules, then you lose your momentum. You lose your behavioral expectation with your people. So getting that is a wake-up call for a lot of businesses. And it's true. The results you're getting today genuinely reflects on the environment that you've built. Okay, so that statement's about accountability at the organizational level. If the organization expects employees to be accountable, then the organization needs to hold themselves accountable as well. So whether the outcomes are positive or negative, low injury rates or frequent near misses or recurring incidences, they don't happen by choice. They're a natural output of the system's expectations and conditions that business has put into place. So if we want different outcomes, we've got to change the conditions, not just tell people to be careful. And telling people to be careful or follow the rules has a very limited impact. So if someone is rushed, dealing with unreliable equipment, or working with a process that encourages shortcuts, awareness alone won't overcome anything. So if we see patterns, same types of injuries, same location, same task, it's not coincidence. It's telling us either there's a design issue with the process or the equipment, there's a disconnect between procedures and real-world execution, or there are competing priorities influencing decision-making. And chances are it's a mixture of all 3, right? So outcomes are actually a lagging indicator of your system performance. So if the system doesn't change, the results won't change, no matter how many times expectations are communicated. So the questions leaders need to ask isn't why aren't people following the rules? They should be asking, what about our system is producing these results, and what do we need to change to get different ones? And that's how you move from reacting to incidents to actually controlling risk at its source. So to continue on, you look at the environment in conditions first, and this is where the heavy focus with OSHA is, right? So it's heavily influenced by conditions like lighting, housekeeping, layout, engineering controls, how well is your equipment guarded, ergonomics, how are you handling the job, administration. Basically, it's the hierarchy of controls, right? But I bring this up for a couple of reasons. Number one, OSHA focuses a lot on process, but not enough on behavior. And I was at the Safe Start conference in Cincinnati last October, like Don mentioned, and I heard Larry mention something that I had not heard of before. So Larry, your words did stick. And the hierarchy of controls should have another layer. I now explain to my employees that PPE is not actually our last line of defense. Your last line of defense is your reflexes. And it's an automated response your body activates as a protective measure. So example, if you hit the rumble strip on a highway when you didn't realize you were drifting in your lane, or pulling your hand away after touching something hot, or even leaning back in your chair, almost falling backwards, but at the last second you catch yourself. Okay, so the more we're automated to follow Safe Start and Safe Lead practices, the more automated we get to addressing behaviors, or even better, assessing risk before an event has the chance to occur. This is exactly where we connect behavioral safety to traditional safety models. And Safe Start and Safe Lead are a massive gap stop to help employees and businesses accomplish that. So if we want to talk culture, culture defines what's acceptable, right? So at its core, culture is not what's written in policies or posted on the wall. It's what gets reinforced, tolerated, and repeated on the floor. It shows up in the small decisions people make on every shift, especially when there's pressure, ambiguity, or no direct supervision. That's why the statement holds true. Culture determines what people do when no one is watching. Also integrity, right? But that's the integrity of your culture. So if the environment signals that production speed is the real priority, even indirectly, people will adjust their behavior to match that expectation. Not because they don't care about safety, but because they responded to what the system rewards. If shortcuts are tolerated, they become the standard. This is just one of the most important and most dangerous dynamics in any operation. Shortcuts rarely start as the norm. They start as exceptions. Just this once to get in the line, to get the line running. Or the worst one I've ever heard is, we've always done it this way. It's quicker and nothing's happened before. Everybody on this call probably has hair standing up in the back of their neck. But if those behaviors are not corrected, then they become normalized. I also tell people, do you remember the first time you drove 80 or 90 miles an hour on the highway? Pretty important thing, right? And you're really grasping that wheel hard, you're looking around, you're trying to pay attention to things. But if you drove 90 miles an hour to work every single day, it becomes normal, and you lose sight of what the danger is in the behavior that you're engaging. So it's a cultural drift where the accepted way of working is no longer the safe way. So if safety is truly a core value, then doing the job safely becomes the expectation and not the exception. At Acme, we repeat this all the time. No box is worth an injury. We value your life and well-being more than the product that we manufacture. And that comes right from the top of the organization. So in order to get there, you absolutely need to have psychological safety, right? Employees must feel safe to speak up. And this is really where my core program and the Safe Start States to Errors and the stories really come into play here. Because at the operational level, the workforce is your most valuable source of hazard identification, not the supervisors or the managers walking the floor. They're the ones interacting with the equipment, dealing with the process variability, and seeking risks develop in real time. That only works if they're willing to communicate what they see. But if they're worried about discipline or blame, they won't report hazards or close calls. Unreported hazards are uncontrolled hazards because you can't do anything about it until you know about it first. So we have reporting without fear, no retaliation. It's not just a policy statement. We demonstrate it through clear action. And some of the things that we do here is The focus is on fixing the condition, not assigning the blame. When mistakes happen, the conversation centers on what allowed it, not who to hold accountable. Now, it doesn't mean discipline doesn't have its place. If we have egregious violations of rules, we do handle that. We handle it seriously and swiftly. But I'm going to talk about the coaching model here a little bit later on in the presentation. But we need to build psychological safety first, because you can't fix what you don't know, and you won't know unless your people feel safe to talk about it and bring things up. So real improvement requires trust from the floor up, not from the top down. So Safe Start strengthens this process by addressing the human side of reporting and communication. So what it does is it gives employees the common language around states like rushing, fatigue, frustration, and complacency. But the ability to recognize and articulate why something felt unsafe, not just what happened. So Safe Start gives us tools to intervene, both for themselves and their peers, before an incident occurs. Instead of reporting being limited to incidents or obvious hazards, Safe Start expands it to analyze close calls, work on habits, self-triggering, and so on. It's a major shift. So Safe Start helps move the reporting system closer to where the risk actually begins. It also reinforces the non-blame approach. When conversations are framed around states and human errors, it naturally reduces defensiveness and encourages openness. Employees are far more willing to speak up when the focus is on understanding conditions rather than judging someone's actions alone. So one of my mantras throughout my whole career is always be a coach before a cop. And I put the accountability on my employees for that. I said, I'll work with you on anything, but if I have to be a cop, that is a condition that you created. We're here to work with you, but if we have to go down into that red zone, there's something here that you're still not understanding about what we need to have happen here every single day. So we either enforce rules or develop people. And most organizations default to enforcement because it's immediate and measurable, but it does have a ceiling. So if we lead like enforcers, we get compliance at best. But enforcement has a role. It establishes boundaries and non-negotiables. But if it's the primary approach, you'll see employees doing the right thing only when somebody's watching them. That's compliance. It can save some incidents, but it doesn't build a resilient system. In some cases, it goes further into resistance. Well, people work around rules instead of with them. Shortcuts go unreported instead of being addressed. Trust between leadership and the workforce erodes. But if we lead like coaches, we're going to build understanding, ownership, and long-term behavioral change. Coaching operates very differently. It's still holding the line on expectations, but it focuses on why behind the behavior. So coaching-based behavior will ask questions instead of making assumptions, and we seek to understand the conditions influencing decisions. Connects actions to real risks, not just rules. So this kind of it uses mistakes as learning opportunities, not just violation, because it needs to build ownership. And that, in a nutshell, is what Safe Lead helps provide us. So, talking about compliance. Compliance is mandatory, but working safely is a personal choice. We can enforce rules, but we can't force people to care. Okay, rules, policies, and procedures are essential. They set the expectation and define boundaries, but they operate externally. And what I mean by that is they influence behavior only when there's oversight, accountability, or consequence. Caring, which can also mean ownership, is a personal responsibility, and that's internal. And you can't mandate that through policy. So true safety happens when individuals make the right choice, even when no one's watching. This is the standard that we're really aiming for here. In a corrugating, converting environment like us at Acme, there are constant moments where employees make decisions, whether it's to stop and lock out just to reach in real quick, whether to take a longer, safer route or a faster, riskier one, or whether to speak up about a hazard or just let it go. Those decisions often happen in seconds without supervision, and that's where incidents are either prevented or created. So what influences those decisions in the moment? Our job is to influence that decision-making process. This is where our leadership systems and programs like Safe Start all come together. You influence decision-making by shaping awareness, the environment, the expectation, the reinforcement, and then ultimately the mindset. So I've given you this big lead in. So you're saying, well, good. Well, how does Acme do this? Well, this is where everything becomes actionable. So we take these concepts and apply them directly to daily operations, shifts, meetings, observations, job tasks, all that stuff. So safety is a core value and not our one. Safety is a core value and not our number one priority. It is our number one fundamental, though. So you can see on your screen, we have 24 business fundamentals that we operate by. And every week, one of these has a focus. So there is somebody on the team that will do a video about it. They'll go out on all the TV screens in the plant. They're reflected in every meeting. So first we start with safety, and then we talk about what the fundamental is and what it means to them. And then we can get on with our normal business agenda. So values are inspirational and because they describe what we believe, but fundamentals are operational. They define how we behave every day. So if safety is truly a core value, it has to be visible in decisions, especially when conflicts with production, cost, or schedule. Otherwise, it becomes a slogan rather than a driver of performance. These fundamentals create consistency, and this is where the real strength lies. Fundamentals are clear, repeatable expectations. Consistency is what turns safety from individual effort to a system reliability. If safety is truly the number one fundamental, then it must override production when there's a conflict. It must be consistently enforced at all levels, and it must be visible in how decisions are made, not just how they're communicated, because employees ultimately define what's important to them based on what they see and not what they hear. So actions are truly louder than words. So getting back into the core program. So I kind of explained to you how I came up with the name core and what we do about that. So if safety is just a priority, we're eventually going to lose to the production pressure. This is the reality in high demand environments. And when something is framed as a priority, it becomes conditional, important, but flexible. And that's where risk increases. So to support this, I formed this core team, and I'm going to kind of get into the process now to share it with you. But this is where the engagement happens. Okay, engagement isn't built through policies and emails and large group presentations. It happens when employees are actively involved in identifying, discussing, and solving the risks they face every day. When people are part of the conversation, not just recipients of the information, they move from passive compliance to active participation. Cross-functional teams help create that ownership. This is a key lever for us. So when you bring together different roles, like operators, maintenance, supervisors, safety, and leadership, you get a more complete picture of risk. And that cross-functional perspective does two things. It improves our hazard recognition, and it builds shared ownership. So everybody knows it is everybody's responsibility. And when people help define the problem, they're far more committed to the solution. So small group discussions allow for honest conversations about real risks. And this is where the quality of the conversation changes. In large settings, people tend to stay quiet, but they're much more willing to speak openly about shortcuts, pressures, and challenges in a small group. Real issues come out, things that don't show up in formal reports. You get into the why work is actually performed a certain way. This is critical from a risk standpoint because many of the highest exposures exist in the gap between how work is supposed to be done and how work actually gets done. So one of the great things about Safe Lead, the supervisors raved about it, was because their groups were so small, they had really good interactions with Larry when he was here. And they raved about it. And so when we try to get real good systematic change and improvement, we'll still do the big broadcast announcements, but the work gets done in small groups, and we get a lot more buy-in that way. So this is the execution model for the core program. It defines how safety actually happens on the floor, not just what we expect, but how we consistently apply it. Without a clear execution model, even strong programs become inconsistent and dependent on individual effort. Inspections are your verification layer. They ensure that either engineering controls are in place or environmental conditions are recognized or equipment is operating with safe parameters. But the key solution here is that inspections are not just about finding deficiencies. They're about understanding why conditions exist and how to influence that behavior. So now we look at hazard analysis, right? This is where risk is formally evaluated. Whether it's JHA, JSA, it's all semantics, right? The goal is to identify exposure points and understand energy sources and potential human failure opportunities. So what it does is a couple things. It determines appropriate controls based on the hierarchy of controls, which is great. But what strengthens the model is linking the hazard analysis with a real input from dialogue and inspections. That closes the gap between documented work and actual work. So this is where Safe Start adds a unique layer because Safe Start cards bring human factors into the execution model by prompting discussion around states like rushing, fatigue, frustration, and complacency. It gives employees a simple way to recognize and communicate at-risk conditions, shifting conversations from what happened to what led up to it. Instead of focusing only on hazards and controls, this adds insight as to why errors occur in the first place. That's critical because many incidents are not caused by missing controls, but by momentary lapse of judgment influenced by the state that they're in. So this model creates alignment between what we know, what we see, and what we do. By integrating Safe Start into existing processes, you're not adding complexity, you're increasing precision. It's not an extra thing. So, and that's what drives consistent performance. Not more safety activity, but more effective safety activity. So I was once told by an owner I used to work early on in my career is persistence equals success. And that is very true. This isn't a quick rollout, it's a process. And that distinction matters. A rollout implies a start and a finish, something you don't implement, something that you implement and then move on. But behavioral safety and culture change don't work that way. Behavior change requires repetition, reinforcement, and time. From a human performance standpoint, this is non-negotiable. Behavior is driven by habits, and habits are built through repetition, reinforcement, and application. You're not just teaching information, you're rewiring how people recognize risk, respond to production pressure, and make sensible decisions in the moment. That doesn't happen in a single session or even a few weeks. It requires consistent, visible leadership involvement and integration into daily work. The timeline isn't the issue. Consistency is. You're not implementing a program, you're building a habit system. And that's exactly what Safe Start and Safely designed to do for us. So in the core program, I have a 2-phase meeting roadmap. So the first meeting, we set the expectation, right? The meeting is less about content and more about tone and credibility. So what we establish here is what this process is and what it isn't. So the first thing is how people are expected to participate. And most importantly, to let them know it's safe to be honest. This is a safe space. And that's intentional and it's effective for us because it does a couple of things immediately. It breaks down formality and scripted responses. I don't know how many meetings that you've all been in where you can tell you're kind of getting a canned response and maybe there's more to it, but that's what you got, right? So it breaks down the formality and it signals that you're not looking for corporate answers. It gives people permission for people to say what they actually think. When even 1 or 2 people raise their hands, we've now created an opening. Now the group sees it's okay to be real here. And that's obviously the foundation for psychological safety. The key rule is psychological safety: no blame and no names. And this is critical, and it has to be more than a statement. It has to be demonstrated in how you respond. So with psychological safety, people can speak openly without fear of discipline or embarrassment. The focus stays on the conditions and the decision making, not individuals. Conversations are used to learn, not to assign fault. From a safety systems standpoint, it really supports hazard reporting, near miss identification, root cause analysis. Because again, if people do not feel safe speaking up, the system will go blind. Now, the second meeting reinforces through discussion and feedback. So what happens during the first meeting and the second meeting, there is homework. So we do kind of a few different things. So I now have job hazard analysis at all my machine centers in 3 different languages. But just posting them out at the machines is not going to get us any mileage if people don't know what they mean. So safely, we went through all the JHA stuff, and I really like the updates that Larry gave us during that time. But now part of that is that I will meet with them on the floor in their own environment. I will take them through, well, before we added all this PPE or these lockout procedures, this is how our risk score looked. And, you base severity versus probability. But now look at how much safer it is here. And if you find something else that you think can make this job safer, absolutely talk to us. Let us know about it. We explain in these meetings that we're always speaking to you. This is your opportunity to speak to us. And it's led to actionable items and procedural changes, which I'll get into in a little bit. But by this point, we're saying it's time to take the excuse factor out of the room, right? And I'll ask a very plain question. I say to everybody, and now we have, when these meetings begin, we have multi-layered management there with small groups of employees. Our director of operations, our production manager, myself, the superintendent, and the employee supervisor. And then all the other people, all the frontline employees are there. And it's the supervisor's responsibility to make sure that all the employees have filled out 2 Safe Start cards. Now, if you want to take the devil's advocate point of view, a lot of people aren't going to be thrilled about having to fill out a card, right? So when we come back for the second meeting, the supervisor distributes the cards. He says, yep, they're all done. I ask a very simple question. And the question that I ask is, who thinks filling out Safe Start cards is a pain in the ass? And the reason to do that is so I don't get the eye rolls, and I try to keep focus in the room. So by this point, people have had time to think about the concepts. Some have tried using Safe Start cards or notices states in real work. But there's more to talk about than just theory. Now the focus shifts to sharing real examples, discussing what worked and what didn't, how it could have been worse, and reinforcing expectations through peer input, not just leadership direction. And this is where the engagement starts to happen. So going back to addressing the friction of the room, my top 2 excuses, because I will always get some people that will raise their hand. First thing I do is thank them for being honest, and it's cool. Let me have it. And one of them is, I'm really busy in my job. I don't have time. Well, then I asked them, I said, well, when we have a job for a particular customer that there's a mistake made, we catch it in-house, which is really good, but now we have to redo that customer order. How much time does that take in our production time? They said, oh yeah, we got to do this and we got to do that. And I said, yes. First is, how long does it take to fill out a Safe Start card? And all of a sudden that friction just starts to get a little bit less, because you're not going to be combative. I'm not going to be combative, but I offer a different perspective. And then the greatest one is, I already work safe. I'm a safe employee. I pay attention to the rules. Why do I have to fill these out? I already know this stuff. I said, well, wait a minute. I said, complacency is one of the most fundamentally risky states to be in when an injury or a serious close call takes place. So again, I always say, how fast was the last time you drove 90 miles an hour? Well, I did that once. Yeah. Who were you texting at the time? People say, what do you mean? I wouldn't text driving 90 miles an hour. Exactly right. But if you got comfortable with driving 90 miles an hour all the time, it becomes normalized. The next thing you know, you're doing 90 miles an hour and you're just checking a text message real quick. It's the same thing of being a machine operator, very experienced for a lot of years, doesn't do lockout because they just wanted to get in that machine real quick. It's the same thing in the workplace, comparing it to real life, which makes it more relatable to people. So, and that also helps determine psychological safety, because I'm not there to rip anybody down. I'm just here to offer a different perspective. But when you take the excuse out without victimizing your people, you get a lot more out of the whole process. So we build trust through shared vulnerability. So again, I thank the vocal ones, because trust doesn't come from policies, procedures, or even good intentions. It comes from behavior that people can see and believe. And we have strong policies. We have detailed procedures. We have leadership messaging about safety. But none of that builds trust, okay? Trust is built when employees observe consistent behavior over time. How supervisors respond when something goes wrong, what happens when production pressures conflict with safety, whether people are supported or penalized when they speak up. That's what employees base their decisions on, not what's written, but what's demonstrated. So if someone notices a hazard, admits they made a mistake, or calls out a risky condition, they're asking themselves, am I going to get blamed, or is this going to come back to me? I do want to go off script a little bit. Just this morning, I learned that there was an employee meeting on a different subject, but they talked about safety. And the supervisor led late second shift last night and said, who's got a safe start story? And I had one of my third shift employees saying, yeah, I wasn't paying attention, and he's a seasoned operator. I wasn't paying attention, and I had my hand right near where these rollers were going by, carrying the finished goods down to the shipping department. And I didn't think about it until after, but if my hand got stuck in between those rollers, I could have had my whole hand stuck in there. And so the supervisor sent out that email just saying, hey, we had this really good story last night. And now, if that was something that was taken in real time, depending on what we found out, maybe there's discipline there. We don't know, because we've got to find out the why behind the how. But this person stood up in front of his peers and talked about a shortcoming and freely admitted it. And everybody agreed, we are not going after this guy. We are not going to discipline this guy. We're going to meet with him first thing Monday morning, when at the end of his shift. And we're just going to ask two questions. We're going to say two things to him. And the first one is, hey, listen, it took a lot of guts to say what you said. We appreciate that. And by the way, you self-disclosed and you had a lot of integrity to do that. You're not in any trouble. We're not going to discipline you for that. But now we want to work with them and saying, hey, what were you thinking at the time, and what could we do differently to make sure that doesn't happen to somebody else? And that's the beauty of what Safe Start teaches us and teaches employees when you get psychological safety. You don't get all your safety concerns answered by discipline alone. Discipline has its place, but in our business, discipline is the last resort, not the norm. So we want to reward people for being honest and protecting them and their coworkers. So we always say, is it easier just to stay quiet? Yeah, I think so, because not every frontline employee is going to be a Dale Carnegie public speaker, right? So most serious incidents, they're not sudden. They're the result of repeated exposure, known but unaddressed hazards, or patterns that were visible but never escalated. So leadership and Safe Start come in by giving employees a language to talk about states and human errors, framing conversations about why errors occur, not who caused them, and by reducing defensiveness and encouraging openness. One of the things that I have always seriously enjoyed about all the Larry videos and seeing him speak at different events is that he breaks everything down, and he talks to people in simple, direct language. So when people think it's going to be a long, complicated, difficult process to follow safety initiatives, procedures, or what have you, it's an automatic turnoff, and you've already lost a lot of that concentration about the information that they need to get. But because this language is simple, it's adaptable, and it's easily customizable, there's a whole bunch of different ways that this can be successful. So the leadership mandate for Safe Start, the first thing is to manage your own behavior. You want to always make sure you set the example, and it's non-negotiable. Leadership credibility is built on visible behavior, not expectations expressed. If leaders are not actively participating, the workforce will interpret Safe Start as optional and not needed. So when you say do not expect employees to tell Safe Start stories if you aren't telling yours, that's exactly right, because you're establishing that vulnerability starts at the top. Self-awareness is not just for the workforce. It's expected of leadership. And leadership is just as accountable on the floor as the frontline employee. The frontline employee can talk to anybody in leadership if they see something that isn't right about it, and they will not be reprimanded. As a matter of fact, they will be thanked. And that is the culture that we've now achieved here at Acme. And the communication is a lot easier. So this is where participation either grows or shuts down, because psychological safety isn't created through statements like no blame. It's created through consistent responses over time. So pillar number 2 is to manage your relationships, right? Allow employees to report and focus on what led to the state, not just the action. Reinforce that speaking up, it's valued, even when the content is uncomfortable. And the last thing is performance management is reinforced through feedback and discussion. So this is where many organizations I see fall short. They introduce tools but fail to close the loop. Safe Start cards are not just data collection tools, they're engagement tools. If employees take time to reflect on their state, document a situation, submit a card, and nothing happens afterward, the message doesn't really matter. Performance management changes that. Leaders need to review Safe Start cards regularly, provide feedback both individually and in group sessions, highlight trends, rushing during startup or fatigue or extended shifts, or in our plant, it can get quite hot in the summertime. And if we connect those insights back to operational improvement, that results that employee felt valued and their observation influenced decisions. People are only going to participate willingly instead of being voluntold if they believe what they're doing matters. And the best thing for leaders to be able to instill that is follow up and follow through, which ironically is one of our 24 fundamentals. You might be doing a lot of work that somebody suggested, but if you don't get back to them and let them know what's going on, they assume we do nothing. Safe Start gives us language to be able to have that circular discussion and have it make sense. So what's on this slide here, this is just part of the monthly update that I give to the executive team here in Acme. And so we had this meeting between 3 machine centers, and not everything here involves Safe Start. However, there's a lot of Safe Start language in here. So it becomes true just by documenting stuff like this, that we have psychological safety in these meetings. Stuff really gets discussed. We talked about the controls and actions that we put in, and boom, the employees walk out of there feeling valued, saying, hey, my participation in that made a difference. And when people feel that way, they're more apt to keep participating. So the program is very valuable, and all we're doing is putting Safe Start and Safe Lead core concepts into what we're already doing. And the excellence and the enhancements that we get are threefold here. There's no question about that. So we're in manufacturing. So you always have the dilemma of production versus protection, right? And I know in other environments that I've worked in, a lot of employee fallacies will say that safety is important until production goes up. And what I explain to them is we need to look at that a little differently, because it doesn't matter what you manufacture. We manufacture boxes. It doesn't matter if you make bicycles or widgets or Barbie dolls. Your production demands are going to rise and fall. So when they go up, How do we get the output that we need but not losing any focus on safety? And that's really simple. Stop work authority. So if we have time to do a job over, then we have time to do it right. So we might need to speed up production lines, but we're not going to do it to a point where it's unsafe. Because nobody's life is worth a box. And so we say, look, this is the art. This is the elephant in the room with production. When production demands go up, human error has a bigger chance to happen. It's not a character issue. Okay, it's a predictable human performance response. Under pressure, people are more likely to rush, take shortcuts, and narrow their focus. So supervisors have to make tough decisions, right? Do I get the line back up quickly, or do I slow this down to ensure that it's done safely? Safety is treated as not a competing priority. That decision becomes situational, and that's where variability and risk can increase. So the goal is not to choose between production and protection. It's to recognize unsafe production is unstable production. Shortcuts might gain time in the moment, but they introduce a higher likelihood of injury. We're not thinking about the ripple that we create. We talk about the stone that we're casting in the water at the moment. We have to remember that if we let that happen just one time, it's going to happen all the time, even when production demands are down. I'll give you a real world example. Derek knows this, Don, I believe, knows this. They've toured the plant, but when we make boxes, they come in stacks of sheets, and then they'll get put in a pre-feeder, and it feeds in these converting machines, and we make them into boxes and print them and cut them and all that. So we had a pre-feeder issue. These are very large machines that take out a lot of ergonomic risk versus what we call hand feeding machine. So in a nutshell, the pre-feeder went down, and maintenance needed to get it fixed, but they wanted to keep feeding the machine by hand to keep the line going, which is not unusual in our business. But what happened instead was the pre-feeder has this thing, these what we call layboy belts, and they all come up. It's a very large piece of equipment, very heavy. It's either hydraulic or jack screw driven. And so they had to take one of these big, large screws out. So then you had excess weight on this thing, and we didn't want people coming underneath trying to hand feed with any risk whatsoever of this thing coming down. So we shut the line down, and we had a very large production day. Nobody gave us a hard time about it. But what we did is we were able to set up extensive rigging to make that rock solid, to know that if everything failed, that's still not going to fall. And so eventually we were able to get the line moving. We got the pre-feeder fixed and placed back into service. If we were just concerned solely about production demands, we would have had people under there literally risking their lives trying to get product out the door. We don't do that here at Acme. So people are empowered, not just the managers, not just the supervisors, but the frontline folks. And one of the employees told me, I don't feel safe about that. And I said, listen, I don't blame you. I wouldn't either. That's why we're not putting you under there. We're going to come up with a solution, and we'll put you on another machine center to help out somewhere else until we get this problem solved. And we did, and we rigged it properly, so everything was good. But the employees after said, man, I'm glad you didn't want to make me do that. I was going to have a big problem with that. And I said, well, here's the way I look at things like this, because I don't do your job. But I'm a very proud father of a 32-year-old son. And I'm like, would I put my boy under there to work? And my answer is absolutely not. So if I'm not going to put my own son there, I'm not going to put you there. And that levels the playing field. And that's another method to show that you care about your people. So I want to clean this up a little bit by talking about different things that we face in a production environment and how Safe Start and Safe Lead helps us navigate. So with this, Safe Start helps us by using the Safe Lead hazard and risk assessments, right? Psychological safety, the communication tools that Safe Lead teaches us. The other thing is about admitting mistakes and normalizing the error. So at the core, this is about shifting from a blame set mindset to learning. In any operation, errors are not rare events. They are expected human outcomes, particularly in conditions like rushing, fatigue, frustration, and complacency, right? If the question isn't if the errors will occur. It's whether they are hidden and repeated or recognized or interrupted. Normalizing error, there's an important distinguish. Normalizing error is recognizing that human factors influence behavior and must be managed. But accepting behavior is allowing unsafe behavior to continue without correction. And Safestart in this approach focuses on that. You're not lowering the standard, you are improving the ability to meet the standard by addressing what leads to the error in the first place. So telling Safestart stories shows trust through humility. So when leaders and employees share these experiences, it demonstrates humility by acknowledging, I'm not immune to the risk. It builds credibility because people trust what is real, not what's scripted, and it creates connection. Others relate and reflect on their own experiences, and that combination drives engagement, and it reinforces psychological safety. So if leaders can admit mistakes, employees feel safer doing the same. If employees share openly, hazard visibility increases. So the bottom line, admitting mistakes doesn't weaken safety, it strengthens it. And Safestart stories are the best way to do that. So it replaces blame with understanding, and it replaces assumption with awareness. So when Safestart stories are shared consistently, they build a culture where people don't hide errors. They use them to prevent the next one. So what about employees feeling unsafe to speak up? Look, fear is one of the biggest barriers to effective safety management, and not everybody is good at speaking in front of their peers. So in safety, what we can't see, we can't control. So Safestart teaches us that reporting close calls is where we get our learning for free. And I believe that is widely stated in units 1 and 2. This is one of the most valuable tools in the entire model because it's an incident that almost happened but didn't. But where Safestart strengthens this, it's not just equipment failures and obvious hazards. It's also about I was rushing and almost reached into a pinch point, or I was distracted and stepped into the line of fire, or I was fatigued and I didn't notice a hazard right away. This removes blame by focusing on the states and human factors and encourages self-reporting instead of only supervisor-driven reporting. It turns everyday moments into learning opportunities. And leaders always have to thank employees for reporting, even when the situation involves a mistake. We focus on what was learned, not who was responsible. And we avoid using close call reporting a basis for discipline unless there's a willful disregard, right? But share lessons and so to make sure that other folks benefit. And then inviting input. So at its core, it means people closest to the work have the best visibility of the risk. And Safe Lead teaches us that active listening is how we learn. This is the shift from talking to listening. Many leaders believe they're engaging because they give direction, they reinforce expectations, they share information. But Safe Lead emphasizes that learning flows the other direction, from the floor up. Active listening means asking open-ended questions like, walk me through how this task actually gets done when the line's down. What makes this step difficult to follow every time instead of why aren't you following it? Where do you feel the most pressure during this process as opposed to why aren't you working faster? That's how you uncover the real risk, not just assumed risk. And then coaching instead of policing, right? So again, Safe Lead teaches us in active leadership to inspire ownership in conversation. So at a basic level, policing focuses on rule enforcement, identifying violations, correcting behavior after the fact, but coaching focuses on understanding, decision-making, and identifying and influencing conditions. So the coaching mindset can say, help me understand what was going on at that moment. And now you start to hear, oh, we were trying to get the line back up quickly, or this guard makes it harder to clear jams. What can we change to make the process safer and easier? And it shifts responsibility from fixing the person to improving the system. Because in most cases, unsafe behavior is influenced by time pressure, poor equipment design, ineffective procedures, or environmental conditions. So reinforcing and connecting. So when an employee stops before entering a line of fire situation. They take the time to lock out properly. They recognize their rushing and resets, speaks up about a hazard. These are critical moments, but they often go unnoticed. So from a behavioral standpoint, what gets recognized gets repeated. The last time your boss tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Hey, great job, keep up the good work," you're a lot more likely to keep doing the job the same way. So it's not like, why should we reward people for coming in and doing their job? We recognize people for making sure it's being done safely, because that's what breeds behavior and that's what keeps your culture wheel moving. So when we connect safety to consequences, we talk about the critical error reduction techniques, specifically, not what the person did, but what could have happened. And then that might force them to look at that a little differently as well. Good thing that didn't happen. But what do you suppose could have happened to you this and this? And a lot of times I'll start to get personal responses. Oh man, I've got a 2-year-old at home and I wouldn't be able to pick him up. I might be laid up in the hospital. My wife has to take care of the kids, all this stuff. But when you make the personal connection by reinforcing the positive behavior, you're going to get more honesty and you're going to get a stronger culture. And then I'm just going to follow this, end it here is, always practice the art of self-triggering using Safe Start guidance. And that is a hot topic of area of discussion. We're really discussing self-triggering a lot these days. And it builds self-correction. And there's a lot in these cards that talks about the way to be able to self-trigger, avoid that complacency. But the bottom line, simple daily reinforcement is what turns Safe Start from a concept into a working system. It's not a program, it's a system. And it keeps safety visible, it builds shared and common language, and it reinforces expectations in real time. And most importantly, it allows us to catch risks early before it becomes an incident. The program and Safe Start and Safe Lead have been extremely helpful to us. And the folks that we've had from Safe Start that have come through here have really been excellent, professional. And right now we're working with Derek, and Derek is he's a rock star here. Everybody loves Derek. And Derek, I'm looking forward to seeing you on Monday. But the whole thing here is to tout what works and to recognize what doesn't work. And that's why we value the whole Safe Start and Safe Lead programs at Acme. And that will do it for me, Don.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic. I'm Tom. I'm looking at the clock. I'm waiting for some questions to come in, and because we had a little bit of the rocky start of getting it up and running because of Zoom, I was wondering whether or not it would be all right if we took a 5-minute break so that everyone could get up, including you who've been talking, and stretch for 5 minutes. And that would take us to, say, 26 after. And then I'll come back and we'll just go right into the question and answers. Do you need longer than that for a stretch, sir?
No, all set. That'd
Okay.
be fantastic.
All right. So everyone, please don't leave. Please put your questions into the chat now. And please take a 5-minute break and get up and stretch your legs, or, and we'll see you back here in 5. If it was all easy, anyone would be doing it. All right, then. Excellent. There's a question that came in from Jim Chapman. Jim, are you able? I know you were bursting during the break, but can you? Yes, there you are. Would you ask Tom your question, please?
Yeah, I have several, but let's do this one. How do you train/support your coaches and leaders to have your 2-phase meetings? And do they use a template? Do they have a tool? And how do you track that? So yes, 3 questions in one.
So yes, that's a great question. And thank you for that, Jim. So I do have a model program. I do have it outlined with what the expectations are. And actually all the employees get a copy of that during the first meeting. And not only that, but with Joe, our director of operations, he's our senior most people in all these meetings. He is actually the one that is assigned to lead it. It's not always going to come from me. So he's very well scripted on how to get things moving. So I call it Joe's the play-by-play, and I'm the color guy. But yeah, you have to have it really structured, but then you have to be able to have it in a structure where you can wiggle it around depending on the temperature of the room. I'd be happy to share that with you. If you ever wanted that, just let me know how to get it to you.
I think I'll probably start through Don. There was also a sheet with some of your company-wide mandates that I thought was really valuable, so I'd like to pick at some of that stuff. I'll talk to Don about getting that from you, but thank you.
Absolutely.
Jim, are you all done with your questions?
Sure, let's share.
No. I just meant if you have got more, please go ahead.
No, next person, thank you.
Okay, so Kathy Climby, who's actually does our video production and used to teach video production, has a question for you. Kathy, are you able to unmute and come on camera and deliver your question?
Hello.
And here comes Kathy.
Here I am. Hi.
Hey, Kathleen.
How are you?
Great.
We could maybe not right now, but I'd love to talk to you about video making. I could maybe give you a few tips, but at a later time.
Welcome all free advice. That would be wonderful.
There you go. We'll set up a date to do that. My question was a really simple one. I'm in the product development department, and this has come up where how do you teach people or let people know what to expect? So you have somebody, they don't know anything about Safe Start. They get a memo, they have to go to this training session. They may not feel that enthusiastic about it. Like it could be something as basic as bring a pencil. But is there a way that you communicate to people how to get there and be down with it?
Yes, and I will start by bringing it back to my youth in the 1980s, the early 1980s. And I went to a lot of concerts. And what did you do in the 80s when you had a band on there that you really liked? Every big lighter went up in the air, right? And the whole sea was big lighters in the crowd. Everybody's singing and liking it. You have to know people are not going to walk out of your safety meeting doing that, right? And so I like to bring the denominator down in the room and make it be more like not a training, but just an honest conversation. You know, there's a time to use professional language, but there's also a more effective time to use plain language, just like Larry does when explaining Safe Start concepts. You want to make it easy to understand. And then when you have a better understanding, you're much more apt to follow it because you get the concepts more rather than saying, what did you mean by that? I don't know what to do. And then that increases what? Frustration, right? But bringing it home, the thing is to make the playing field level, not playing to your lowest common denominator, but making it common for everyone. So everybody gets the same, or basically the same message. And then I also make sure after I've seen some of these employees, I'm working with a couple different machine centers, I'll come visit them during their shift. Hey, how's it going? You need any help? Was there anything you didn't understand? How far have you got so far? Hey, show me what you're thinking. Because there's that coaching aspect. And like people are not Ronco ovens, right? You don't set them and forget them. So it's more about engagement to be able to get it back. So instead of saying, this is what thou shalt do, and come back next week and have to be ready, that's not going to motivate anybody to want to put any effort into it. They got to know somebody's behind them to help them with it.
Right.
And yes, I would love to talk video making with you sometime. That would be great. Appreciate it.
Okay. I'll try and set that up. Thank you.
Alex Wiley, you had a question. Are you able to come on camera and ask? Well, I'm not seeing movement so far. All right, Alex may have stepped away. So Alex, great presentation. A lot of what you said resonate. Oh, tech issues. I'm sorry. So I got a little prompt that came up.
Sorry, can you guys hear me now?
I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. First of all, fantastic presentation, Tom. I really loved it. A lot of what you said I connected with immediately, and a lot of new stuff that I haven't really heard. I loved environment drives expected action. Thought that was wonderful. Definitely going to use that in the future. My question is, you mentioned a really good Safe Start story that you got this morning, or you heard this morning from an employee whose hand was near a roller.
Yep.
And the plans to make that employee feel supported and proactively, prevent any potential issues from happening with that specific roller. So my question is, what are you seeing with the peer-to-peer storytelling ratio? And I mean between at home and on the job stories, because it sounded like with this story being told, it kind of gave you a proactive measure to kind of prevent that injury or an incident from occurring again. And yeah, just curious.
So a couple things. First thing I want to do is make sure I make an example out of it, but the right example. And not the fact that he screwed up, he shouldn't have done that, it's his fault, saying, no, you know what? This guy had courage. His first name's Steve. He spoke up in front of his group. He spoke right to his supervisor and totally was honest. Rather than saying it's supposed of saying what he didn't do, it's about what he did do. So you want to support them to that, so they know somebody else says, hey, I did this. He didn't get in trouble. Maybe I could share this, and you make people feel more comfortable rather than thinking it's just going to be punitive. And as soon as I say that, I'm going to get written up. So you want to take the fear out of reporting. And people always, I've been preaching here 5 years, right? The Church of Tom has been active, but people need to understand that I'm there to help them, not to police them. And it invites it. And I'm sorry, there was a second half of your question, Alex. If you could say that again for me, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My second part of my question was, what are you seeing with the peer-to-peer storytelling ratio between both, on the job stories as compared to off the job stories?
Surprisingly even. I thought maybe I would get 90% stories about the workplace, but I'm really not. I'm finding out all kinds of crazy stuff that have happened to people at home. And I think maybe at the beginning, when people start to feel safe to speak up, they want to talk about something safe, and something safe is outside the workforce because they can't get me for that, right? But so I look at those kind of examples as a stepping stone to get to a better place where we can really talk even more openly at work. So in the peer-to-peer stuff, I can't quantify that, but I do talk to people and say, oh yeah, we talk about this and we talk about that. Now, some of it's overzealous and some of it might not be, completely forthcoming, but you want to aim for somewhere in the middle anyway. So when you have success, you want to tout that, and you don't necessarily have to bring names up. Because, I heard these two people at the 1228 and they were saying this, so all you're doing is encouraging growth, and you measure that. Everything that you recognize, you can measure.
Thank you very much.
Sure thing. Thank you.
So, and Tom, I just wanted to jump in with a comment. Recently was just looking at some data from a tire manufacturer that we work with. And their one plant has 1,700 employees, and they're using an electronic system to actually get stories in. But because that makes it harder to discuss and do the engagement in the workplace, but because they had lots of data, they're getting about 60% of their stories are from home, about 20% of their stories are out on the road, and about 20% of their stories are at work. Like that's the ratio they're getting. And they're strongly encouraging workplace stories. They just don't get as many of those. And the psychological safety that you talked about, I mean, if it's away from work, I can't possibly be blamed for it. So I can share, whereas when it's at work, there is that possibility. And you're right, people, what's in it for me to share this other than I might be disciplined? And there was another little comment that I wanted to make, because you'd mentioned like stop work authority in your presentation. And, when you visit like a Japanese automotive manufacturer, the stopping of the line is accompanied by the happy tune. Like, I absolutely want, this is, oh great, it's a learning experience, not, oh, the line stopped. Toyota. Like, it's the happy tune. We've got a problem to solve. Isn't this great? I was just wondering, with those examples where like people are stopping work, is that then promoted? Like, is that talked about in your meeting about, like a great stop work happened on this, and we really want to thank this employee? Like, are we getting to that?
Yes, we are. So how this usually works is that I'll get a text message from a supervisor on the floor. Hey, Tom, I got an employee here that doesn't feel right about this. You want to come over and take a look at this with me? Boom, I'll drop whatever I'm doing and we go out. And the more, I mean, look, the workplace here is no different than any other workplace. Stories can spread like wildfire if you want them to or not. But what I would rather have them talk about is saying, hey, look, so and so had this problem. They stopped it and they came over and they took care of it. He didn't get in trouble and they just made it better. And so when that becomes part of the the gossip chain at work, it still strengthens your program, even if it's through gossip. And so you want to tout that and say, yeah, look, this is why this works. This is why we're not getting injured. This is why we're getting the close calls as opposed to the injuries.
Okay. Jim Chapman had one more question. Jim, I don't know that you want to you were talking about getting the leadership to be humble. And I'm guessing, like, working here, I mean, you can appreciate it would be really hard to get the leadership to be humble, because
I have no comment to that, Don. You keep on trucking. You're doing a great job.
Sure. You've never worked with humble leadership, so how did they get it? Anyways, why don't you ask that question? And I'll just try and keep a straight face.
The question, Tom, was, can you talk a little bit about humility and what it's like? You seem to have, it seems to be really healthy in your environment, and that seems to also suggest or downstream success. That's what it leads to. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, how you select leaders, how you seem to be able to create this?
I have a wonderful story to share with you about that. So I've been here for 5 years. And when I first got hired in 2021, I had just moved back into my home the week before. And we had been out of the house because we had lost everything in a fire. And so COVID and construction supplies, it took over a year for us to get back in the house. So my perspective was automatically different in starting a new job. And I had 37 years of my life spent in the dairy business. And I took a big leap of faith to come here to Acme to figure out how they make boxes and apply what I know to this environment. So the executive team sat down with me and says, look, we'll give you 30 days. Try and do a gap assessment. We'd really like to know what your opinions are about what's needed and whatnot. So I called a meeting a month later and I took a big career chance. And I thought my honesty, seriously, was probably going to get me fired. So they said, what do you see? And I said, well, first of all, I want to really compliment you. And because when something goes wrong, everybody is all over it. Everybody's action, everybody's concerned, everybody's out to prevent, everybody's going to stop it. I've never seen such positive reaction before. But I have a question. Well, what's that? Now, this is the owner, the CFO, the CEO, all the executive team. And I said, I don't see anything proactively being done for safety. I said, no meetings start with safety messages. It's great to see you out on the floor, but I hear you always talking about production numbers and how well the plant looks and how clean it looks. Are we talking safety? Because the more we talk about it in the front end, the more we're not going to have to do the cavalry brigade to get something done. I don't see any of that. And the GM at the time, his name was John, he thought about that for a second, and he was a big guy, real big, deep voice. And he goes, you know what, Tom? I never thought of it that way before. And even with our VP now, he's safety all the time now, and he talks about it and he backs it up with his words and what his expectations are. But that really wasn't the norm. So I'm not going to sit here and say I saved Acme or anything like that. What I will say is that it ignited a light switch in their leadership roles. The people that are on our executive team, I will say, are very bright, intelligent people, and they got it. So I'm still employed. My badge worked this morning when I came in still. I was really happy about that. But in all seriousness, I took a big chance. But the thing is, if I don't feel comfortable with my role and my responsibility if I can't speak candidly. It doesn't mean I have to attack somebody, but if I can't have real, honest conversations, then this isn't a place I want to work. So it really worked, and boom, it's like wildfire now. So I'm really grateful that happened. But that's kind of how it got started.
That's a great story. Thank you.
Okay. We're about 5 minutes to 2 o'clock. Thank you for that answer. As always, I am about to hand this over to Barb Tate, who's our CEO, who is going to, I think she had some quotes that she wanted to come up with, and she's going to say the final thank you to you. But sorry, just of the many things that I wrote down, sorry, that question about stop work authority, but like the quote that went with that was, unsafe production is unstable production. Mm-hmm. And I actually really like that, is that if you can't do safety right, probably you can't do anything else right. Mm-hmm. And I think that message resonated with me. But without further ado then, Barb, can I hand it over to you to close us out?
Of course, yes. And hi, Tom. Been a while. How since last fall, but we had a nice exchange then. So second time seeing you. That was on the Safe Lead panel, and there, the pages of notes from that panel, and now look what you've done to my notepad again. So I put the quotes in on to the chat just because Larry had said, I'm looking for the transcript. I'm like, no kidding, like just from memory, those are and notes. How many? What would you say from the old Reader's Digest days? Quotable quotes Tom gave us today, but Tom, I think the one. You think of our mission, we love productivity. We know that's what sells, quality, all those things. But when you said, if I wouldn't put my 32-year-old son in there, I'm not going to put you in there. Yep. And I just think that says it all for the person you are and the caring you have for your colleagues. And thank you, not just for the business you do for us and the support you give to us as a partner, but just thank you for being the human being you are, to spread that kind of care. It's really special. Thank you so much, Tom, and for your generosity of time in terms of, I know that's where it's coming from, that you take the time to help our team so we can help more people, make sure their 32-year-old sons are safe and sound, and daughters, and that's why you do it. And I know we can all feel it, and so that's maybe the heavy, serious one. And I'm not thanking you for all the Larry Wilson, Indiana Jones reminders, because I think you and I spoke in Cincinnati. I was like, that ruined Indiana Jones for me. But I might be the only woman who speaks that way. Sorry, Larry, but like, oh, come on, he was hot.
Oh my gosh.
So thank you, Tom. Can't wait to see you in Nashville. So
well, I really appreciate that's very humbling. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Well.
All right. Okay. Then on behalf of all of us, thank you. Have a great weekend and a safe weekend, everyone. And we'll see you next month. Okay. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you, everybody.